You've probably heard this story a million times, right? The child prodigy who peaks early and then nothing. And then you have the quote-unquote average kid who goes on to change the world. It's a great story, but what if I told you it's mostly built on a really simple statistical illusion? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a common math error that will completely change how you think about genius and success.
So, headlines like this one have been all over the place, and they're all based on a major new study. The story they're telling is really powerful, that the super brilliant kid from your childhood, yeah, they might not be the one who ends up making the biggest splash. It kind of plants this seed of doubt, like, is being a genius early on actually overrated?
And that leads us to this really fascinating question. Does being a child prodigy somehow put you at a disadvantage later in life? I mean, it seems totally backward, doesn't it? So let's peel back the layers here and see what the data really has to say.
Okay, to get to the bottom of this, we have to go straight to the source. All of these headlines, they point back to one single study published in the super prestigious journal Science. And you know, when science publishes something, people definitely pay attention.
So, the main finding from the study seems pretty straightforward on the surface. Researchers looked at this massive group of high achievers and found something that sounds surprising. A huge number of them were not childhood prodigies. Nope. A lot of them were actually late bloomers who kind of bounced around between interests before finding their thing.
But here is the thing. Here's the catch. It's so tempting to look at that and conclude that being an average kid is somehow better for you in the long run. But that interpretation, it falls right into a classic statistical trap, one that can lead us to conclusions that are just flat out wrong. That trap has a name. It's called the base rate fallacy. Basically, it's what happens when we focus on some shiny, specific piece of information and totally ignore the big picture, the original starting numbers. We end up comparing the results from two groups without realizing one group was just massively larger to begin with. Seriously, understanding this one concept is the key to solving this whole genius puzzle.
Now, I know that might sound a little abstract, so let's make it super concrete. We're going to walk through a simple thought experiment, and I promise the math is easy and it will show you exactly how this statistical trick messes with our brains.
Let's just start with a random group of 1,000 kids. Nice round number, right? Out of these 1,000 kids, a few are going to be geniuses, and most of them are going to be what you and I would just call ordinary kids.
All right, let's break this down with a couple of really reasonable assumptions. First, geniuses are rare, right? So out of our 1,000 kids, let's just say only 10 are geniuses. That leaves 990 ordinary children. Second, let's assume geniuses just have a much higher chance of becoming a top performer. We'll say a 1 in 10 shot. The ordinary kids, they still have a chance, but it's lower. Say 1 in 100. Now you just do the math. From those 10 geniuses, we get one high achiever. But from that huge group of 990 ordinary kids, we get about 10.
So what happens? If you only look at that final group of 11 successful adults, you see 10 who came from an ordinary background and only 1 who is a child genius. It is so easy to look at that result and think, see, I knew it. Ordinary kids are more likely to succeed. But you'd be making a huge mistake.
And this slide shows that perfectly. The wrong conclusion is that ordinary kids are more likely to succeed. The correct fact is that any single genius child is 10 times more likely to succeed than any single ordinary child. The only reason the final group of high achievers is packed with former ordinary kids is because the starting pool of ordinary kids was absolutely enormous. That, right there, is the base rate fallacy in action.
Okay, so we've seen how the trap works in our simple example. Now that we've got the base rate concept down, let's go back to that big study from Science that was making all the headlines and look at it with our new, smarter eyes.
First off, the scale of this research was just massive. We're not talking about a small experiment here. This was a meta-synthesis. That means it was a review that pulled together data from lots of other studies on over 34,000 top performers. We're talking people in science, sports, music, you name it.
But here's the really crucial part. It's all about the study's method. They didn't start with a bunch of kids and track them over time, no. Instead, they started with adults who were already successful and then worked backward to look at their childhoods. Now, that's a great way to find patterns, but it is absolutely the wrong tool if you want to compare the success rates of different groups.
And that, right there, is the single most important thing to understand. The study tells us what the backgrounds of successful people tend to look like. And yeah, a lot of them come from non-prodigy backgrounds. But it absolutely cannot tell us the probability of success for a genius versus a non-genius. Why?
Because just like in our math problem, the starting pool of non-genius children is just astronomically larger than the pool of prodigies.
So, if this whole curse of genius thing is a myth, what are we supposed to take away from all this research? Well, the real message is actually way more optimistic and, honestly, more useful for all of us.
Here's the encouraging truth. Success isn't just reserved for a tiny handful of people who were amazing at age 5. Top performers come from all kinds of backgrounds. A ton of successful people are late bloomers who only found their real passion after trying a bunch of different things. Having a winding path of steady growth is a totally valid and really common way to get to the top.
So let's just be crystal clear about this. This is not about some genius curse. The study does not show that being a prodigy is a disadvantage or that early success is bad. What it does show is that the road to excellence is wide, and there's room for a lot of different kinds of journeys.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. Instead of obsessing over who was or wasn't a prodigy back in the day, maybe the more important question is the one we should ask ourselves. Knowing that there are countless ways to get to the top, what does your journey look like?